The essence of Christian obedience is not the do's and don'ts, but it's a commitment to Jesus personally. The reason the Bible talks about obeying God is because the Bible wants you to treat God as a person and not as a thing. What do we do with impersonal things? We use them. What do we do with our phone, with our car, with our television? We use them. They don't have any goals of their own. They don't have any purposes of their own other than to function. And then we use them to reach our goals. They have no goals of their own. We use them for our purposes, our desires. Well, how do you treat a person? How do you treat a person? Well, some people treat persons like things, They don't worry about what the other person wants. They don't worry about their goals or their desires. They simply use them to get their own. And if you have people like that in your life, you know what it's like, and you just want to push them out, because they're treating you like a thing. The way we treat a person is that we interact with them and we find out what their goals are. We find out what their desires are as well, and we adapt our behavior accordingly. We react to them, and we adapt to them, and we seek out what that person wants, and we see how we can work together to reach our goals. And the more you love someone, the more you experience someone, the more joy you have in adapting to them. You actually seek out ways to make them happy and to help them reach their goals. And the more the intimate relationship, the more you find that you want to help the other person and submit to their desires. You adapt rather than use that person. Now, when it comes to God, He is so much greater than us. He is the top of the food chain. And so if we react to God as a person, and we elevate Him and we love Him, then the only way that we can truly react to Him as a person, interact with Him as a person, is to obey Him. Because He's infinitely above us. And so if we want to treat Him the way He deserves, that is, we find out His will and we seek to do His will. A lot of times we come to Christianity, we come to Christ, because we have a need in our life, and there's nothing wrong with that. We see that somehow life is not fulfilling us, or there's been a tragedy, and we see we need God to get through something. There's nothing wrong with that. But often people come to God as a self-help God only. They see that person, hey, I knew her a couple of years ago. She was pretty much a wreck. But now, after I heard she got religion, and now her life seems pretty straight. She's much more on an even keel. I think maybe I ought to try out that religion. I think maybe I can see if it'll make a difference in my life. And we want God, and we want something from God, but we don't want to give Him obedience. We're afraid that He will ask us to do something that's difficult. We want a God who loves us. We want a God that will give us peace and will enrich our lives. We don't want obedience. And if that's our attitude, then we're using Him, we're relating to Him like an object and not like a person. And if we treated the people in our lives around us the way we sometimes treat God, we'd be very lonely, because they would leave us. And so the purpose of knowing, Jesus is saying, the purpose of knowing my truth and holding to my truth is so that you can become my disciples. And I can pour it into you. And that you will make me, Lord, you will align your lives according to my purposes, and we will work together. Now, that's what it means to treat God as a person and not as a force. Now, the second is the method, the person of obedience. We owe God obedience. That's the way we love Him, the way we interact with God. And the second is the method of obedience. How do we do that today? What does it look like? And obedience, first of all, is not a one-time thing. You don't say, I've made this decision for God. I've got my fire insurance. I won't be going to hell. God, I'll see you in eternity. No, that's not what it means to be in a Christian life. The Christian life is kind of like being married, you know. You don't just say, I do. Okay, we've got a great marriage. And then you go and you do whatever you want. Are you going to have a great marriage? No. A marriage takes interacting. It takes relationship. It takes work. It takes obedience. And to have a great marriage. And Jesus is here saying, it says, if you hold to my teachings. Or the old King James says, if you continue in my word. And that word hold or continue is a little Greek word that just really basically means if you stay put. If you stay put. In the day, it was a word that meant to move somewhere and settle down. You settle down and you put roots into the ground and you stay there. Chris and I were at a restaurant last night. We ran into the lady that worked for the finance company that helped us finance the loan for our house. And we hadn't seen her in 10 years. And so we talked to her and we said, yeah, we're still there. We're still at that house. And she said, oh, that's so great because I'll pass by that way sometimes and I wonder if you're still there. People move around so much. And so I thought about that. And I was thinking about our house and how we have settled down there. And Chris said, yep, we'll be there another 10 years. We'll be there, on. We don't plan on moving. We're settled down. We put in roots. We've made commitment to that place. And we're going to stay. And what Jesus is here is saying is when it comes to my word, when it comes to teaching, when it comes to the scriptures, you need to settle down in it. You need to live there. And what I'm talking about is not just simply, again, nothing wrong with this. It's just running by a Bible verse in the morning, saying a little prayer so you have inspiration and strength for your day. That's a wonderful thing to do. Do not go back to Nate and say, Chuck says we should be doing our devotions. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's not less than that, but it's a lot more than that. Because what Jesus is talking about settling down in his word, he's talking about taking it and not just having it in your head, but that's what you have to do. You have to learn, see what's there. And then you put it in your head, and then you work it down into your heart, into your life, so that it changes who you are, the way you look at your relationships, the way you look at the world you live in, the way you look at God, the way you look at your children, the way you look at your entire world, and how you interact with it. And it takes more than simply glancing at the Bible. It means reading it, understanding it, applying it in your life. I don't know, but in the spring, I look forward to the spring. I love the spring. But there's one thing that I don't really love about the spring, and that's yard work. I noticed yesterday that after these storms and stuff, that oak tree that we have in our backyard, it lost a lot of limbs. And I know, man, before we can cut the grass, I gotta pick up all these limbs. And there's always a day that comes around. It's usually the first warmest day of the spring. And so I'm out there doing yard work all day. And sometimes it means remulching. And sometimes it means just dragging stuff to the corner of the yard to burn or whatever. And it's hot work. Now let's say I'm out there one day and the sun is burning down. I'm just sweating buckets. And I've put a pitcher of water on a table out by the back porch. And it's water and a glass and ice. And so during the day, when I get so hot and everything, I'm getting dehydrated, I walk over to that water, and I pour that water into a glass, and I pour it out. And I spit it out. Set it down. Then I go back and do more work. And then I come back to it again, and I pour another glass out, and I spit it out, and I go back. How long would I last? Not very long if I'm not taking the water in to my body. I'm just going by it. And that's the way we often treat the Bible. We hear a sermon and we go, wow, that was really interesting. What did the preacher talk about? Someone asked you the next day. I don't even remember. Or we read and it goes in one ear and out the other, and we don't really take it in. One of the most amazing things about nature, one of the most amazing creatures in nature to me, is the cow. You go, what? The cow? Yes, the cow. A cow can take grass which we just cut, or hay, which we don't want anything to do with hay. And a cow, she can take that and she can eat it and she can process it and it becomes milk. And what do we do with milk? We give it to our babies so that they can grow and be strong. Because it's full of nourishment. There's milk right there being drunk by a baby. Didn't mean to distract you because now he's choking. Okay, we're good. But a cow can do that. It's an amazing thing. Now, what do you do when you see a cow? Anytime you see a cow, what's a cow doing? It's either eating or chewing. It's either eating or chewing. Because a cow has what? About 5 stomachs? This is an amazing animal. It's processing that grass. Why don't we just take the grass, since it's so good to us, obviously, we give it to our baby, and just put it in a blender with some water, and then put that in the bottle and give it to our babies. No, they were not like that. I mean, talk about the ultimate health drink that tastes bad. No. But it's been processed by a living creature. And our souls need to process the Word of God so that it becomes nourishment to us. That gives us the strength to do the day-to-day in the presence of God. So that we're not worrying all the time, or we're not tossing and turning when someone criticizes us, or we're not, doubting the love of God when difficult times come in our lives. We're more like Christ, and we're more like, we become more like Him as we obey, as we know, we understand, and we obey His Word. So that's the method. That's how we become like Christ, taking His Word and working it out in our lives. And we can say, Chuck, I know sometimes the Bible, that's hard to understand. That's a battle. And yes, it is. And so if you just start, whether you've been reading the Bible forever or whether you're just getting introduced to it, I encourage you right now to read the Gospel of John. Start at the Gospel of John. Because when I'm always reading the Gospel, I like to read through them because I encounter Jesus there. And He becomes real to me. And sometimes I'll read the Bible of John and I'll say, I'll have a theme when I read through it. I'll say, how did Jesus treat women? Or, what did Jesus say about Himself? Or, how did people react to what Jesus said? And just look for those things. And sometimes I have questions, because, boy, chapter 8 of John, you read some of the things he's saying around this verse, and I can understand why the Pharisees didn't quite understand what's going on. So if you have questions, write them down. Find someone that can help you answer those questions. Don't tell Nate, but text him night or day, anytime with a question. He would love it.
Yes, he would. Call him.
Find someone. If you're in a discipling situation, ask your discipler. If you're in find some good commentaries, some things that can help clarify, because I know sometimes it's difficult to understand. But as we do, I tell you, it's well worth it to understand what the Bible says and to apply it in our lives. That's how we grow to become more like Christ. And then finally, and very briefly here, you're going to have to listen faster. So get out of here. Lastly, he says, if you continue, the result, this is the result of obedience. The result of obedience. If you continue in my word, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You ever heard that before? Everybody, you see it on bumper stickers. You see it everywhere. The truth, know the truth will set you free. Well, what does it mean to be free? That's the key. That's the first thing. The big thought of the day is about freedom. Freedom, we often think that freedom is doing whatever we want. And yet, we realize that true freedom comes through some sort of discipline, some sort of work, some sort of putting ourselves under the authority of others so that ultimately we can be free to do what we want. Somebody once asked Tom Loudry, the coach of the Cowboys, Dallas Cowboys, back when they were America's team and everybody hated them because they won so much. And they asked him, how do you describe your job? And he said, my job is making men do things they don't want to do so that they can do the things they really want. Okay, they do the things they don't want to do so they can do the things they really want. They work hard, they practice, they get up early in the morning, but they win Super Bowls. They work hard so that they can do what they want. You know, when the band up here plays, I get jealous because I can't play an instrument. Chris and Kara and I went last Friday night. We went to the Chapman Cultural Center. We watched a little concert. It was a percussionist concert. So, I mean, they banged on everything and made music out of it. And xylophones, kettle drums, cigarette lighters, they played it all. And I look at that and I get so jealous. I get so envious of people who can do work, just can express themselves. And I wonder about musicians. Do they ever just sit at home and just play and just enjoy what they're doing, expressing themselves? But you knew what it takes, right? You knew what it takes. It takes starting out at 4, 5, 12. You know, and you got someone sitting over you and saying, play, play. Oh, you know, I don't want to play. No, go back, play. And you're doing a half hour a day. Then by the time you're 12, it's an hour a day. Play, play. And it's interesting. You put yourself under the authority of someone else so that later you can have the freedom to express yourself through that. You realize that you are giving up some freedom so that you can have a greater freedom. You're chaining yourself to that instrument. And it becomes your master in some ways. And you wonder, why am I doing this? But then later it becomes an instrument of freedom, of expression. You know, I think probably one of the most blissful things anybody can do, is I see it in movies or I see it in documentaries, is when musicians are sitting around the kitchen, they're sitting around the living room and they're just jamming, you know, jam session. Just expressing themselves, doing all the old favorites, just enjoying and expressing their skill and their way to express themselves. But it takes the time of being under an authority so that we can have the freedom that we want. And so we have to be under God's authority so we have the freedom to become the people that we desire to be. You know, like I said, people think freedom is just doing whatever you want. And I wish it were that easy, doing whatever I want, because I don't know what the heck I want. I don't know what I want. I mean, look, I want to be slim, and I want to be healthy, and I want to be active, and I want to eat all the cheesecake in the world. You know, I want those things, and those are all desires that have equal power over me. So if you just do whatever you want, half the things that I want contradict the other half of the things I want. How do I know what I want? And so just doing what you want is not enough. And that's why my big picture says is freedom is not just doing what you want. That's chaos. That's anarchy. Everybody doing what they want. But freedom is doing what you truly desire. It's reaching those goals, having the power, the discipline, to do those things that you truly desire to do. And we sometimes don't understand that, how do we do that? How do we follow some desires that I have are healthy desires. Other desires that I have are enslaving desires. They enslave me. And the Bible and the Bible alone, again, I'll go back to the Bible, is the only place where we can learn which desires enslave and which desires free. Only God knows who we are. He created us. He knows the consequences of our behavior because He built us and He sees it all. There's an old book I read a long time ago called Disciples Are Made, Not Born. And in that there's a great illustration about a salesman who would travel by small plane to the different areas in his region. And he was flying this little plane over a mountain range that he did often. And he had driven this road back in the day, winding road over the mountains. And one day he looks down, clear day, he's flying pretty low, and he sees this big old truck going up the mountain. And behind that truck is a car. And that car is obviously in a hurry. And that truck is only going 25 miles an hour up that hill, that mountain. And every time the car would go around, another car would be coming, when it was straight. And then when it was no car was coming, he was on a blind curb and he was too afraid to make a move. And it was interesting to the pilot because he was looking from a different perspective. He could see that for the next 20 miles, there was not another car coming. And yet that guy is stuck behind that truck going 25 miles an hour. And he basically thought to himself, if I could just have a radio, I could talk to that guy in that car, and I could tell him that the coast is clear, and then he could get on his way. Well, that pilot is like God. God sees not only the 20-mile perspective, he sees the 1,000-mile perspective. He doesn't see just the 20 miles, he sees the 1,000-year perspective. He is from that place where he knows the future, he knows the past, and he knows us intimately. He knows our difficulties, he knows our struggles, he knows who we are, and he knows our deepest desires, and he wants to make us like himself. And so he sees the big picture. He knows how we're built, and he knows the consequences of our actions. And so we can trust him, and we need to obey him, because he'll tell us when it's safe to pass. Nate always ends with a challenge. So let me end with 3 questions in challenge, and that you can think about throughout the week. Do I treat God, number 1, do I treat God like an impersonal force or like a person? Do I treat God as someone who wants to interact with me, that has my best interest at heart, or do I just treat him like a genie, ATM machine? Secondly, do I respect the Bible? And what I mean that is, do I submit to it? Do I know what's there? Do I see it as important to read and to learn and to apply? And have I made my home there? And thirdly and lastly, do I follow desires that enslave me? Or do I follow desires that free me? As we think about Christian growth and becoming what we want to be, one of the key factors that causes it to happen is obedience. Now, we don't always obey. What happens when we don't? God knows that we are fallen, that we are influenced by the world around us, and he is ready with grace to forgive. But if you want to see growth in your life, you have, like the old song says, to trust and obey. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, as we think about your word and the impact and the power that it has upon us, we ask that you would remind us that you love us so. And that you don't ask us to do things because you're just a bully up there that just wants to have control over life, but that you know that many of the choices that we make and the sin that we succumb to is dangerous to us and causes harm. And you desire, like a loving parent, that we live lives that are fully meaningful and blessed by you. So, Father, we ask that we might submit to your will, that we might trust and obey, so that we can see ourselves and those that we love become more and more like you. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you.
Okay, so this song is one that is an old song, but it's a good one. And I'm going to invite you right now, just do what you want to do. You don't have to stand, but you can stand if you want to. If you want to take time and just sit back and just listen and let God speak to you, please do that. If you want to stand, raise your hands, just worship, whatever. Just kind of take this time to do what you need to do as we sing.
of lightning, rolls of thunder. Blessing and honor, strength and glory and power be to you, the only wise King. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. When all creation has sing praise to the King of Kings, you are my everything, and I will adore you.
Filled with wonder, awestruck wonder, at the mention of your name. Jesus, your name is power, it's bread and living water, such a marvelous mystery.
Jesus, your name is power, breath and living water, such a marvelous mystery. Jesus, your name is power, breath and living water, such a marvelous mystery. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you.
God, we just thank you so much for this time that you've given us. God, I pray that you would help us to know the importance of being in your word. Lord, as Christians, we cannot grow and we cannot survive, God, if we are not in constant communication with you. Lord, whether it be through our prayers, whether it be in our cars, on our way to work, as we talk to you, or God, in your word, it is essential. It is the bread of life. I pray, God, that you would help us to know how to carve out time in our busy, busy days to do this and to make it a priority. Or to make it as much a priority as drinking water or breathing. Because it should be a priority just like that. I pray, God, that you would go with us in our week. Lord, that you would have these things on our hearts and on our minds, that we would be thinking about them. And God, that you would just be constantly changing us from the inside out. Lord, I pray that you would be with each and every person here. We ask your blessing. We just love you so much. In Jesus' name.